We also spoke with a man whose brother was killed at the World Trade Center, is now spearheading a movement against President Bush's war on terror. And we looked at September 11th, 100 years ago, when Gandhi launched Satyagraha, the modern nonviolent resistance movement that continues to this day. Well, today we bring you a national exclusive, a debate about 9/11. Ever since the attacks took place, many people across the country have raised a number of questions about what actually happened on that day in New York, Washington, and Pennsylvania. Websites, articles, books, and documentaries have put forward a variety of alternate theories to the government's account of what happened. The most popular of these is a documentary called Loose Change. The 80-minute film first appeared on the web April 2005. Since then, it's had at least 10 million viewings and is described by Vanity Fair as the first internet blockbuster. As the popularity of Loose Change has soared, a book dealing with the questions it and others have raised about 9/11 has been published. It's called Debunking 9/11 Myths, Why Conspiracy Theories Can't Stand Up to the Facts. It's put together by the editors of the magazine Popular Mechanics. So today we'll talk about some of the theories and the arguments against them. We're joined in our studio by the filmmakers of Loose Change. Dylan Avery is the writer and director of the film, and Jason Burmis is the film's researcher. From Popular Mechanics, we're joined by David Dunbar, the executive editor of the magazine. He led the editorial team that produced Debunking 9/11 Myths. James Meggs is also with us, the magazine's editor-in-chief. Before we go to all of them, let's go to a clip of Loose Change that deals with the attacks on the Pentagon on 9/11.
10:06 a.m., Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Flight 93 was en route from Newark, New Jersey to California with 45 passengers when it went off course at 8:56 over northeastern Ohio. According to the official story, Flight 93 was en route to Washington, D.C. when it was overpowered by a group of passengers and crashed into an abandoned strip mine in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Out of all the events of 9/11, the one that has caused the most confusion is Flight 93. It was shot down, it wasn't shot down. However, evidence suggests that perhaps Flight 93 was nowhere near Shanksville.
Last hour, I want to get quickly to Chris Konicki. He's a photographer with the Pittsburgh affiliate of Fox affiliate. He was back there just a couple of minutes ago, and Chris, I've seen the pictures. It looks like there's nothing there except for a hole in the ground.
Basically, that's right. The only thing you could see from where we were was a big gouge in the earth and some broken trees. We could see some people walking around in the area, but from where we could see, there wasn't much left.
Any large pieces of debris at all?
No, there was nothing that you could distinguish that a plane had crashed there.
Smoke, fire?
Nothing. It was absolutely quiet. It was actually very quiet. Nothing going on down there, no smoke, no fire, just a couple of people walking around. They looked like part of the NTSB crew walking around looking at the pieces.
How big would you say that hole was?
From my estimates, I would guess it was probably about 20 to 15 feet long and probably about 10 feet long, or 10 feet wide.
What could you see on the ground, if anything, other than dirt and ash? And
you couldn't see anything. You could just see dirt, ash, and people walking around.
Wally Miller, a Somerset County coroner. It looked like somebody just dropped a bunch of metal out of the sky. In the Washington Post, it looked like someone took a scrap truck, dug a 10-foot ditch, and dumped trash into it. And as for the passengers, I stopped being coroner after about 20 minutes because there were no bodies there. In the Pittsburgh Review, I have not, to this day, seen a single drop of blood. Not a drop. It would seem that on one day, for the second time in history, an entire plane, along with its passengers, disappeared upon impact.
An excerpt of Loose Change. We'll talk with the filmmakers as well as the editors of Popular Mechanics when we come back from break, and then we'll take on the issue of what happened in Washington, the question of what hit the Pentagon. Stay with us. About what happened at Speech Network, Channel 9415, Free Speech TV, 9410 Link TV, and on Direct TV, Channel 375, and we're video and audio podcasting at democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. As we take on the issue of what happened on September 11, 2001, our guests are Dylan Avery, writer and director of Loose Change, Jason Burmis, researcher for the film. James Meggs is also with us, editor-in-chief of Popular Mechanics, and David Dunbar, executive editor of Popular Mechanics, who led the editorial team that produced the book, Debunking 9/11 Myths. Jim Meggs, you're the editor-in-chief of Popular Mechanics. Your response to this excerpt of Loose Change about what happened in Shanksville?
You know, that clip is really interesting because it shows how slickly made this film is, how compelling it is at asking a series of sort of hanging questions and putting some spooky music behind it and making it sound as if someone's covering up these facts, but a brave researcher can dig down and put all the pieces together. In fact, there's answers to all those questions. If you look at the sources that were used throughout that clip, they're all things that came up in the first day or two after the attacks. In some cases, somebody's standing across a field and saying, I don't see a plane. Well, when a plane strikes the ground at or 500 miles an hour flying almost straight down, there typically isn't much visible above ground. They also quote the coroner in the Shanksville area. We talked to the coroner. He had the horrific job of collecting the body parts and cataloging, performing all the necessary tests. Those bodies were identified. The plane wreckage in the pieces, the tiny pieces that it was in after it hit the ground, was collected from the hole, cataloged. And the black box was recovered, and we know what went on because of the records of the voice cockpit recorder, and in this case, quite a few phone calls from the aircraft itself to various people on the ground. So we know a lot of what happened in Flight 93. The film is alleging that no plane crashed there at all. The people were sent off somewhere to somehow be disposed of. If you're going to allege something so far beyond what a huge body of evidence would suggest is the truth, then you do need to pull together some evidence. And so we fully support asking questions and being skeptical. But if you're going to ask questions, you also have to look for the answers. And when you get answers, you can't ignore them.
James Burmis of Loose Change.
I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity to take on the government's lies and Popular Mechanics, which is a Hearst Yellow Journalism Publications lies as well. And I would just say, look for yourself. This is an open field, and for the first time in history, we have a crater and no plane debris. Look at any other plane crash, and you'll find a tail section, a wing section. There were reports that this actually was strewn out over 8 miles, and we have videotape of smaller pieces of debris. The coroner speaks for himself. We have the Pittsburgh Gazette, the editor-in-chief there saying, again, there's nothing there that looks like a plane. Again, don't believe us. Go to seeloosechange.com right now and watch for free. But take a look. All those people, you would normally have NTSB people in blue jackets to get the plane parts and put them back together. That's what happened with TWA 800 that was in the ocean. And you don't have that. You have people in hazmat uniforms. Why? So all we're saying is, look, there's no plane in this open field at all. There's a 10-foot crater by 16 foot, and there's just smoke there. So where is this plane? That's all we're saying.
What about what the coroner said, collecting body parts?
Well, he's never addressed us, and if you look at all of his media accounts in the days after when he was first asked, again, he said there were no body parts, and to this day, he has not seen a single drop of blood. So again, I would say that's more reliable than, 4 years after the fact being contacted.
Did you talk to him?
He won't address us. Basically, we have had people contact him and it hangs up on us.
I find, typically when we investigate these things, it's very easy to find public records, to find the reports from all the various agencies that have investigated these accidents. The transcripts of the voice cockpit recorder have been released. In many cases, again, the sources, Jason, those are all newspaper articles are written the day of, day after, a couple of days after.
No, one was a year after the fact.
Perhaps you know what it was like on those days, and you know how chaotic it was. You know how much misinformation typically comes out in the early hours of a major news event. Over time, with further research and good reporting, you can sift through those things and you can make progress and get into the truth. Typically, we see on conspiracy websites is citations that go back to the earliest moments when the least information was available, and virtually no reference to the voluminous research which is done to follow up.
Dylan, what about the issue of cell phones?
The issue with cell phones is that for a majority of Flight 93's flight, it was flying over cruising altitude, and a number of these, now, a majority of the phone calls were coming from airphones, but the cell phone calls were coming from cruising altitude. Now, it is pretty much impossible in 2001 to sustain an extended conversation over a cell phone at cruising altitude from a commercial airliner. But I mean, that's not our strongest evidence. I mean, that's just one of the many things about that day that don't add up to us. And we haven't gotten to hear the cockpit voice recorder. We haven't gotten to hear any of these alleged phone calls. I mean, the government is cherry-picking the evidence that it releases to the government, and I feel that if our government was truly attacked by surprise and we had absolutely no inclination in the attacks, they would not be so reticent to release the 84 videos from the Pentagon, the cockpit voice recorder of Flight 93. The list of things that the government is holding from us goes on.
David Dunbar.
With regard to the cell phones, we did what any reporter would do. We talked to experts in the field, and in fact cell phones do work at that altitude, up to 35,000 feet and higher. And
in 2001?
In 2001, and it might be instructive for you to talk to some of the cell phone experts. There are a lot of drop calls because the plane is moving at high speed and the handoffs sometimes get dropped. That's true, and we know from the public record that in fact a lot of the cell phone calls were cut off. And most of the phone calls were made from the airphones. But nevertheless, talk to the experts and you'll find out that you can make a cell phone call from a commercial plane.
Let me address that for one moment. If that's true, then why in 2004 did American Airlines spend tens of thousands of dollars to put cell phone towers in their planes so people could make those calls? Why spend tens of thousands of dollars 3 years after the fact if they worked so well on September 11th? What he's saying is a total lie.
James, next.
We didn't say they worked well, we said they worked. And if you look at the record, many of the calls were dropped, they were incomplete. But especially over rural areas, you know, if you think about it, a cell phone tower can cover a couple hundred square miles. That coverage area goes up into the sky as well as horizontally across the ground. The reason that they improved the system was to avoid the drop calls and to isolate the cell phone transmissions from any possible interference with the avionics.
Well, we're not going to cover any issue comprehensively. We have a lot of issues to cover, and I'd like to turn now to an
the cell phone is a weak argument.
Why do you say that?
Oh, I mean, it's not our best evidence. I mean, there's tons of things we can discuss besides the cell phone.
Just the fact the plane is not there, I think, is our best evidence.
Well,
and anyone can see that.
Let's turn to the Pentagon right now. In the excerpt of Loose Change that deals with the attack on the Pentagon.
It might have appeared that way, but from my close-up inspection, there's no evidence of a plane having crashed anywhere near the Pentagon. The only site is the actual side of the building that's crashed in, and as I said, the only pieces left that you can see are small enough that you could pick up in your hand. There are no large tail sections, wing sections, a fuselage, nothing like that anywhere around, which would indicate that the entire plane crashed into the side of the Pentagon.
The official explanation is that the intense heat from the jet fuel vaporized the entire plane. Indeed, from these pictures, it seems that there's absolutely no trace of a fully loaded Boeing 757. But if the fire was hot enough to incinerate a jumbo jet, then how could investigators identify 184 out of 189 people found at the Pentagon? The Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory, which was responsible for the task, was also responsible for identifying the dead in Shanksville. Keep that in mind for later. So what is a Boeing 757 made of? The exact details are not public knowledge. But what we do know is that Flight 77 had two Rolls-Royce RB211 engines made of steel and titanium alloy, which are 9 feet in diameter, 12 feet long, and weigh 6 tons each. Titanium has a melting point of 1,688 degrees Celsius. Jet fuel is a hydrocarbon, which can maintain a constant temperature of 1,120 degrees Celsius after 40 minutes, but only if the fuel source is maintained. The fuel would have burned off immediately upon impact. Therefore, it is scientifically impossible that 12 tons of steel and titanium was vaporized by jet fuel.
Dylan Avery, the narrator and filmmaker of Loose Change, a film that is getting tremendous attention. Millions of people have downloaded it. Dylan and Jason are here in New York in this weekend of the anniversary, giving out thousands of copies of the film. The issue of the Pentagon, David Dunbar, executive editor of Popular Mechanics.
Well, the clip starts with a red herring, claiming that experts say the plane was vaporized, which is untrue. And in addition, in our book, and I believe even in the film, there's evidence of debris on the lawn of the Pentagon. There's plenty of debris that's been found inside the building. The largest chunk was probably the landing gear that punched through the C-ring to make that 16-foot exit hole. So there's plenty of physical evidence, including the flight data recorder and forensics that were done, that there was a 757 that struck the Pentagon. And I'm still waiting, after 5 years, to see any physical evidence of any kind that would indicate that it was a missile or anything else that hit the Pentagon.
Well, I mean, we've been waiting 5 years to see clear video of what actually happened at the Pentagon, and you guys are coming on and saying that you're experts on the fact when nobody has seen what has happened. You guys claim to have seen, photographs that have been released just to you, and I want to know why those haven't been released to the public.
What photographs have you seen?
I'm not coming on the show and presenting myself as an expert in metallurgy or structural engineering. I'm coming on the show as the editor of this book. And what do? We do what you would do, Amy, or any other journalist would do. We talk to people who are experts in the field, and that's what we did with this book in order to debunk these 9/11 myths. I think I highly recommend it for documentary filmmakers or anybody else who wants to look at the data. That's what we did. We talked to people who were there at the scene. We talked to structural engineers. We talked to aviation crash experts.
Jason Vernon.
Ms. Goodman, I'd just like to address the fact that they have claimed that they have 84 videos through an FOIA request pertaining to what did strike the Pentagon. But the bottom line is, nothing should have struck the Pentagon. We know through the 9/11 Commission testimony that Norman Mineta, the head of the Transportation Department, was in a bunker with Cheney prior to the Pentagon strike. Now, this is the only 3.5 minutes out of the hundreds of hours that's been censored by C-SPAN. Why? Because he says he's in a bunker with Cheney, and an aide walks in and says, "Sir, the plane is 50 miles out. Sir, the plane is 30 miles out. Do the orders still stand?" Cheney snaps his head around and says, "Of course the orders still stand." By the time it was 10 miles out, it was too late, and the Pentagon was struck. That is a direct stand-down order. And if you listen to the NORAD tapes, later on, some of these people are actually tracking these planes, asking to shoot them down, and they're getting a negative shoot-down order. Why is that significant? Well, in June of 2001, Cheney signs a DOD memo putting shoot-down orders in his hands, Rumsfeld's hands, and Bush's hands alone, where it was standard operating procedure. If colonels were to intercept these planes and they saw a threat, they could do the shoot-down order.
Let's back up a little bit.
We
started talking about physical evidence for an aircraft hitting the Pentagon. The aircraft was seen by hundreds of people, eyewitnesses. The wreckage was removed from the Pentagon. The bodies were removed from the Pentagon and identified. None of those people have materialized to explain that this was a conspiracy. We're not a political magazine. We're about facts. We're about what happens when airplanes crash, how buildings are built. And so we're not going back to conspiracies that might have been hatched, during the Kennedy administration or other eras. But we are looking for physical evidence, positive evidence for any of these claims. Every time we get into detail on one, they fall apart. The stand-down order is a good example. If you look at the NORAD tapes, and Vanity Fair, the same magazine that did a very laudatory story on you guys, has a story in their current issue that includes these tapes, and what you see was total chaos that day. Nobody knew where the planes were. It was complete disorganization, and the protocol for how to handle a commercial aircraft was that was off course was a complete mess. And in fact, I think on September 10th, 2001, most of us would have been horrified to think that the minute a commercial aircraft goes off course, there'd be an F-16 on our trail with Sideliner missiles. That was not a country I think many of us would want to live in.
What Mr. Meggs doesn't want to address is that article clearly states that the same kind of thing were happening in the drills as what was happening on September 11th. You have comments like, "I've never seen so much real-world stuff during an exercise." You have somebody following Flight 11 for 20 minutes after it's hit the World Trade Center. And then you have Cynthia McKinney twice asking for reports on these drills, the last time in the 2005 Department of Defense budget thing from Myers and Rumsfeld, and she never gets it. And she asks him, "Well, did these war games, help or hurt us?" And Richard Myers actually said they helped our response on 9/11, which is total nonsense. We know at 8:45 in the morning, the CIA at the NRO building is running a drill of ramming a plane into a building. We know that FEMA was here the night before in New York City for a bioterror drill. We also know the FAA is running drills of 20-plus hijacked jets going in and out of radar at the same exact time these 4 hijackings are happening. That's what he doesn't want to tell you.
building.
I also want to jump in. We still have not seen any pictures of two RB-211 engines, the tail section, any of that. We have not seen any significant parts of debris. And I would like to know what sources you have that the landing gear created that punch-out hole, because I have heard completely different responses. I heard the fuselage is what caused that hole.
There's a photo of it.
There's a photo of the landing gear causing that 16-foot hole.
There's, one of the things that you can do, the Pentagon and a number of other engineering organizations did intensive studies of what happened at the building. The building is a reinforced concrete building. The aircraft was shredded into relatively small pieces. Some of the heavier components traveled farther, including the landing gear. You don't find an intact tail section when a large commercial aircraft hits a reinforced concrete building at 500 miles an hour. This is not a movie.
I do want to go to another clip of the movie, though, of the film. I want to turn to Loose Change, the part that does deal with the damage to the Pentagon. It begins with a clip of CNN's coverage on 9/11.
These photos were taken before the roof of the outer ring had collapsed. The only visible damage to the outer wall is a single hole, no more than 16 feet in diameter. A Boeing 757 is 155 feet long, 44 feet high, has a 124-foot wingspan, and weighs almost 100 tons. Are we supposed to believe that it disappeared into this hole without leaving any wreckage on the outside? Why is there no damage from where the wings, or the vertical stabilizer, or the engines would have slammed into the building? Remember how big the engines were? If 6 tons of steel and titanium slammed into the Pentagon at 530 miles per hour, they would bury themselves inside the building, leaving 2 very distinct imprints. And yet, the only damage to the outer wall is this single hole, with no damage from where the engines would have hit. Why are the windows next to the hole completely intact? Why are the cable spools in front of the hole unmoved? As for the inside of the Pentagon, there's another hole, approximately 16 feet in diameter, found on the other side of the C ring, 3 rings from the impact. For that hole to have been caused by Flight 77, the Boeing would have had to smash through 9 feet of steel-reinforced concrete, traveling 310 feet. The nose of a commercial airliner is composed of lightweight carbon. This is what usually happens to the nose of a commercial airliner in a plane crash. If the nose caused this hole, where's the rest of the debris from the plane? So, what could blow a 16-foot hole on the outer ring of the Pentagon, smash through 3 rings, 9 feet of steel-reinforced concrete, and leave another 16-foot hole? A 757? Or a cruise missile? This is what slowed down.
An excerpt of Loose Change. David Dunbar, executive editor of Popular Mechanics. Your response.
We'll stop it after
we
this.
just looked at the physical evidence, and when the filmmakers can present some evidence of a cruise missile striking the Pentagon, we'll be happy to look at it and evaluate it and talk to our experts. Just rolling the tape back a bit. The angle that the film shows of the facade of the Pentagon before it collapsed gives a misleading picture. That gash in the E-ring was about 90 feet across.
No.
The wingspan of the plane was about 124 and change, not loose change, but that punched the hole into the building. And then the landing gear was more dense and heavier and continued on through a forest of columns to smash that exit ring. So when you see that nice round hole, that's the exit ring, and that's the exit hole in the C-ring punched by the landing gear. And Purdue University did a massive computer reenactment of the crash and the aftermath, and they worked with the American Society of Civil Engineers in preparation of their report, and it's conclusive that the plane did strike the Pentagon.
Donate.
The initial impact on the Pentagon was no more than 20 feet wide, and if you're telling me that that initial round impact hole in the facade of the Pentagon is 90 feet, then you're telling me that the 2 windows above it are 30 feet across.
And incidentally, about the windows, I'm glad you mentioned that. Those were recently replaced in the Pentagon as part of a whole renovation program. designed specifically to be blast resistant after the explosions of the American embassies in East Africa.
Yeah, I found it very convenient that Hani Hanjour decided to choose that one particular section of the Pentagon to hit when he could have just dove straight right into the front door.
In the world of paranoid conspiracy theories, there are no coincidences.
You're not addressing the
I'd
evidence.
just like to say this. The first official version was this thing bounced off the lawn and hit it. And it would appear that it would have to because it's such a low-level hit. Okay, it didn't bounce off the lawn because there's no scratches on the lawn. On top of that, we actually interviewed the first person on the scene before the collapse, and he was on the lawn taking video of it for 12 minutes. His name is Bob Pugh, and it is no more than 16 to 20 foot hole. And we actually have one of the survivors who crawled out of that hole and said she saw no plane debris. Her name is April Gallup. Explained to me how a woman can come through a hole where a 757 has just impacted the building.
10 seconds, Jim.
Yes. We didn't fact check every detail of loose change, but what we did do was look at the broad cross-section of conspiracy theories. There are photographs of the plane in the building of wreckage wrapped around reinforced concrete columns, and there is a map of the path of destruction that plane tore through that area.
We're going to go to a break. We want to get to the World Trade Center. We are talking with the editors of Popular Mechanics and the filmmakers who made the film Loose Chain.
All right. I will send you the link for that video if you will. There's another 10 minutes left, but I think it gets to the point there, especially if you didn't watch the movie, do the extra credit assignment. By the way, have that in to me by Thursday, please. Here also is a story I'll send to you. I'm not going to read over it, but this was actually done by The Guardian, by somebody who had researched this. So, please, if you're interested in the subject matter, go ahead and read this. You may want to also use this for your test when it talks about either token opposition or also, remember, the fourth filter was flack, meaning that if you put out a story like Loose Change, this is the attention you're potentially going to get. All right. Let me turn the lights on here. Anyway. All right, so who makes the more compelling case here? Yes.
Well, the guys that made Loose Change, did the research. They had, physical evidence how something like that, how like the plane couldn't have made, that type of hole. And there was no debris and there was no survivors or anything. But then the other guys, the writers of Debunking 9/11, kind of just tried to suffocate all of their evidence.
And did you think? So take your point here, because I'll argue the other side as well. The people with the Debunking 9/11 myth, don't you think they probably should get pictures of the? And I'll tell you right now, anybody who knows this, anybody ever seen a car that caught on fire? Steel does not melt easy. Anybody ever been to a steel plant or mill? Or seen pictures of this? You see these enormous furnaces? This is so you can get the temperature up around 2,500 degrees to where steel turns essentially into liquid. There's no way that the fuel created a fire that was 2,500 degrees. And in order to melt steel, you have to sustain that for hours. You'd think that the people at Popular Mechanics would have at least come in and had some explanation for why 12 tons of titanium and steel. And is Rolls-Royce a shoddy manufacturer? They make stuff out of fiberglass and plastic? I don't think so. And just like a Rolls-Royce is not going to melt, bring me the engines. Don't bring me explanations about why the engines I mean, do you really find it credible that metal vaporizes? When have you ever heard metal vaporizing? And if you ever, and you remember the hole, especially I want to say the first hole in the World Trade Center, because it hit flush. The second one actually hit almost like on the corner, and that's why you saw the big explosion. The first one hit flush flat. Did you see the hole with the wings? Right? I mean, The wing, no, I will give you, the wings are the weakest part of the plane. That's why this Airbus 830 or whatever, this super jet they've got is starting to crack. I mean, good God, you get in a luxury airplane, you pay $5,000 for a ticket so you get a little bed, and the wings come off the plane. You know, people in first class are going to die too. So, but the ridiculousness that a metal engine would melt. I wouldn't get on an airplane if I thought the engines were made of plastic. Trust me. So, and you've seen pictures from airplane crashes in fields before, haven't you? Or on runways? Things don't just disappear. And human bodies usually don't vaporize, at least as skeletons. I mean, we've dug up fossilized bones from 800,000 years ago, and you know, or like at Pompeii. Those people were preserved perfectly by the ash and stuff. So, and I'll tell you what, the seats aren't just going to disappear and a whole host of other stuff. What I also find funny is that, again, this calls into question that if metal vaporized, and how did they find Muhammad Atta's passport on the ground in the World Trade Center? So, and again, I told you, my passport, the binding's already starting to come loose. Yes?
You can't really compare the hole that was made when one plane hit the World Trade Center to the one that hit the Pentagon, because you're talking about one plane hitting, you know, steel and glass as compared to the Pentagon, which was concrete.
Right, and for those of you who don't know, so you're making the argument in favor of the guys who were debunking this.
No, I'm not.
Well, at least
favoring them.
Okay, well, at least you're giving some alternative evidence. Now, for those of you who don't know, reinforced concrete is concrete that has either some kind of metal or steel mesh inside of it, or like rebar, and it's done to reinforce buildings against things like earthquakes or attacks. And this section also, according to one of the guys, and according to the Pentagon as well, had reinforced blast-proof windows. And this was actually one of the reinforced areas of the Pentagon. They were going to redo the whole thing. And so what would occur, and that was the argument they made, is that a plane even made of metal would be shredded almost like a grate, the way you would take cheese through a grater. That it would just be shredded to little pieces, and the bodies would be shredded as well. So again, all right, what else? Who else think? What side do you think had the better evidence here? Yes.
I think both sides were just going at each other. Nobody had a real solid argument. It was just, you know, the loose change guys were saying that the other guys have. Everybody's just shooting down everybody else's evidence. Nobody has a real solid argument.
All right, so where does that leave you as a news consumer and somebody who wants to know what happened? Can you make a decision one way or the other?
I tend to favor the conspiracy.
But do you still feel somewhat, does at least part of you think that it could be a lie, though, what these people are saying?
What, the conspiracy?
Yeah. Do you get a feeling maybe that both sides aren't being, neither one of them have the right story?
Yeah, pretty much.
So how does that make you feel?
Well, I would like to know, but we're never going to find that out.
So do you feel confused about what to believe here?
A little bit.
Does it make you trust the government less? How about the news media? How does that make you feel about the news media?
The news media is censored by the government, isn't it? So.
Well, and you heard, I can't remember the guy's name, the one who was sitting in the middle, accused Popular Mechanics of being owned by Hearst Publishing, which Hearst Publishing is one of the old families in media, and they certainly have in the past done things that were exaggerations and could be accused of straight-out propaganda, certainly in the early days of their publishing. And with what we've learned about the 5 filters and the media monopoly, you could make the argument that the Hearst family is a big part of it, and they have a vested interest in not seeing the government being depantsed, or even worse, a revolution happening, because, I mean, let me put it this way. I think this is maybe a good question as well. If it was found out that the United States government, particularly Dick Cheney, and you saw who this person was in the documentary on Frontline, okay? I told you, even Republicans, a lot of Republicans don't like Dick Cheney. If it was true that the United States government caught wind that there were hijackers and thought, hey, we want to start a war in Iraq, we'd like to be able to operate militarily without having to give any excuse to invade Afghanistan or some oil-rich region. Let's just let these attacks happen. Like people have accused FDR of allowing Pearl Harbor to happen and be much worse than it could have been. everybody was on stand down when the Japanese showed up. A lot of them were eating in the mess hall. It was Sunday. And they were not on high alert, even though the Japanese had taken over several other islands right near Hawaii and had set signals. But then it let it happen so they could run this war on terror and drive defense spending up. What do you think the American people's response would be if that actually came out?
I mean, I think they have good evidence, but the only thing is we've seen conspiracy theories before, and it's never gonna be. We're never gonna find out if that's true because it's obvious that they don't want us to. They've tried already. It's just disheartening to know if it really was like that, because that day didn't seem like it was done on purpose. That day, it didn't. It was essentially, everyone thought what was going on.
Well, you see the difference, though, between there's two types of conspiracy theories. One, that the government let it happen, and the other one, the government made it happen. And that's a much different reality. Saying the government trained Muhammad Atta and Bin Laden and as like a reserve force to go, all right, when we're getting in a little trouble and we need a war to be started, we're going to get these boys to do something out here. You see the difference between letting it happen like Pearl Harbor and going, and then standing and this is a day that will live in infamy. Because Roosevelt wanted the United States to get into World War II. What did the American people feel about World War II at that time in 1941? Were they gung-ho, ready to kick Japan's ass?
It wasn't America's problem.
No, they didn't want anything to do with this crap. And even though we were helping the British behind the scenes by lending them things, the United States would have rather just stood back and watched these. They, I think for moral reasons, felt in the European campaign they had to get, and then obviously the attack. The United States would have rather sit back, let these people knock the hell out of each other, and then come in and clean up the mess and charge everybody for it. Which is essentially what they did, because we did get deeply involved in Japan, no doubt about it, but in Europe we were, and the U.S. military would probably get mad if they heard this, we were a secondary force. It was the Soviets that really drove the Nazi army into surrender. I mean, there's no doubt about it. On the Western Front, Hitler didn't really send the types of reinforcement he had on the East, and I'm not downplaying what the U.S. military did, but the U.S. military in the United States was not attacked. So, again, what would happen if it was shown that Dick Cheney let the Pentagon get attacked because they wanted to start a war in Afghanistan? What do you think the American people would do? Nothing?
I don't think so.
Yes?
I think they're just being mad, but there's nothing we can do.
So nobody would occupy Washington or something like that, or try to impeach people or have people arrested, thrown in jail?
I think if something like that came out, to be true, it wouldn't, because it's so it hits so close to home with so many people.
What if it came out that Pearl Harbor, JFK, Martin Luther King, Malcolm, all these assassinations, the bailout, and 9/11 were all orchestrated by the government? Then how would you feel about your government?
How would I feel about them? I already think that they're a bunch of assholes, so, that's not going to change. And, I feel like a lot of other people think that way still, but again, there's nothing we can do.
And the one positive aspect, except for bureaucrats, is in a democracy, you don't need a violent revolution like you do in Egypt or something, because you can just kick these morons out by the ballot box. And if it was shown that the Democrats and the Republicans were somehow engaged in some kind of a cover-up, I think that would be the end of these two parties. Okay? Who knows what would replace them? It would be something worse. I would say that about a little lesson for the Middle East. Be careful of democracy. Hitler was elected, okay? So be careful with democracy. It's got problems, too.
I feel like no matter who we elect, it's just one asshole after another. Nothing is going to change. No offense.
And some people would say the evidence of that is that one of the things you see repeatedly, you saw the other day, by the way, Ron Paul is raising a tremendous amount of money, and also from wealthy people now. And up until now, wealthy people weren't interested in libertarian ideas, so this ought to be an interesting finish to the nomination, and Mitt Romney's not availing himself very well. I think what you're saying, people look at some of these politics, and I'm not going to mention which ones, but you know which ones I'm talking about. How are you like us? You know, and why are you taking money from all these people? And even the president, who probably spends right now 70% of his time raising money and giving political speeches instead of reading and doing bills. But anyway, any other comments about what's going on here? Yes?
Like, I think they should focus on, like, obviously a plane went missing, so where did it go?
You mean the Flight 93?
Yeah, like if they're saying...
Well, here's the thing. If the people are alive, then what are they, keeping them in a basement somewhere?
I mean, like the one that they say crashed into the Pentagon.
Oh, okay.
Like...
But the problem is, again, there's missing people.
Yeah.
There was 180 people on that plane. Where'd they go? Like, is it like Cocoon or something, and they walk through a wormhole, or I don't know, you know, it's like Stargate?
Maybe they got moved to kill.
Maybe that's what they went, like, you know, when you put socks in the dryer and they disappear. Maybe there's another world inside the dryer. But, I mean, I'm not trying to make a joke about what you're saying here, but there certainly is some issues with what they're saying, because if it was a missile, then where the hell did the airplane go?
Yeah, because if they were tracking
Because people
it,
died.
Yeah, if they were like tracking where it flew, like then where it
The
flew.
bigger issue is, why the hell didn't the U.S. Air Force do something to stop this stuff when they were scrambling in the air anyway? You know, I think, to me, one of the most damning bits of evidence, and maybe explains why there is a cover-up. Maybe it wasn't the United States government. Maybe it was Pakistan that attacked the United States. I don't know exactly why. I can give you a few reasons why. They don't exactly like the United States. They don't like the way we're friends with India versus not with them. And we put embargoes on them in the past and all kinds of things. But don't you find it funny that the ISI chief, and this has not been denied? This has not been denied. This ain't in his debunked thing. The ISI chief sent $100,000 to Muhammad Atta the day before 9/11 happened? Don't you find that strange?
Who is that?
The head of the Pakistani intelligence service, essentially the head of the Pakistani CIA, wired $100,000 to Muhammad Atta like the day before, and was in Washington at the time. And Condoleezza Rice claims she wasn't meeting with him. So what the hell was he doing there? Just to make sure that everything went down well? Because several of these, at least one of these planes was hijacked from Washington itself. Yes.
Oh,
I think it was 93 or 77.
That $100,000 would be like payment for...
Or something, or, hey, here's, in case you come into any trouble, maybe if they were caught him and he had to run, or whatever. I'm pretty sure that they bought those tickets to... One of the guys at, I want to say, they came out of Maine. And if you ever watch the Ken Burns documentary on the World Trade Center towers, what he said was, and airline people are taught to look at if there's something going on. The guy said it was a $5,000 one-way ticket for first class and paid in cash that Muhammad Atta had. So you can bet that trying to keep under the radar is a good idea to buy the ticket right then, that day, instead of where somebody might be able to track you. The bigger issue also as well is the CIA was tracking Muhammad Atta and most of these other people. And when they got to the United States, the CIA told the FBI that these people in the country, and they quote-unquote lost track of them. And probably shouldn't say this about the FBI, not that they're the sharpest stick in the broom closet or anything like that, but come on. I mean, even, you know, the Nassau County Police could have kept track of these fools. You know, maybe they do a better job, probably. You know, I'll tell you right now. So who knows? But the FBI, you know, and you know what the motto of the FBI is? Anybody know what the FBI's motto is? They always get their man. Which, as a man, I find that sexist. Tell me there's no female serial killers in this world? Come on. And I'll tell you right now, if these terrorists are evolving the way the U.S. government thinks they are, they'll start using women as terrorists. It'll make more sense. Probably pack a woman up, make her look like she's pregnant or something like that. That's why they have. That's part of the reason why they have those X-ray machines. Yes. One last comment, then we'll do a group exercise.
I don't know if you remember Flight 587, the one that landed in Queens, but it wasn't hijacked, but
somebody said there was like a shoulder. There was one airplane crash, and maybe this is the one you're talking about, where people said that they saw a smoke trail,
yeah.
And it exploded.
Yeah, I live in that neighborhood, and it actually crashed into a gas station.
Was it Far Rockaway? Is that right?
It crashed into a gas station, and nothing vaporized. So so, I mean, fuel from the gas station and the plane itself.
You mean the engine fell on it?
But jet fuel and car fuel is two different things.
It's, I mean, I just find it hard to believe that nothing disappeared there, but it disappeared out of nowhere into...
Okay, and maybe we'll never get the answers to this. I think one of the things that was brought up that I want to talk about a little bit here just quickly is this idea of the fog of war. One of the things that one of the guys kept saying is that you were using eyewitness accounts and news accounts from the first moments of what happened in this sort of the fog of war element going on versus post hoc reporting where you have more facts and you can gather more data. One of the conspiracy theorists essentially was suggesting that this post hoc reporting is massaged and censored and then presented in a certain way. So anyway, but again, I don't know if we're ever going to get to the point where we can answer all these questions. But let's move on. I want to do a little bit of an exercise called You're the Editor. I'm going to make you guys the editorial board. So what we're going to do is we're going to get in groups. I think we'll just do it by rows. This is best. So you guys are group 1. This is group 2, 3, 4. Yeah, this will work actually. 5 and 6. Yeah, because then some groups will be smaller and then it'll sort of fit with what's going on in some of these newsrooms. So if you're group 1, you're the National Enquirer. Okay, so keep that in mind. You might want to write that down. Group 2, you're CNN, the TV news channel. Group 3, you're the New York Times. Group 4, you're PBS NewsHour. Okay, that's much more serious news. They do longer pieces. There's no, there's a smaller amount of, I know it says public television, but it's actually underwritten by corporations, and they show commercials for Exxon on PBS, which when I was a kid, they never would do that stuff. When I was younger, when cable first came out, MTV, Nickelodeon, all these channels, they didn't have commercials. I know that's hard for you to believe, but I'm telling you right now, it used to be beautiful, just like YouTube. YouTube used to be open and free, and Prince's songs were still on there, the good songs. Not all the bad songs he's written over the past 20 years. Anyway, so in group 5, you're Channel 12 Long Island, that's a local station. In group 6, you're Google News, which is run by AP Wire reporters. So in Google News, you're trying to get people's attention. So, okay. Now what I want you to do, and I'm going to try and fix this silly thing here. What I want you to do is, out of these stories I'm going to show you, I guess that'll, yeah, that's good. I'll make it a little bigger. Now, out of these stories I'm going to show you, I want you to choose one headline story, or if you're a broadcast thing like CNN or PBS, one story you're going to lead with, and then four other additional stories put on the front page. So here are the stories. Let me make this smaller, actually. And you can see some of them are actually real stories. Other ones are ones that I made up as a bit of a joke. That, not to make fun of Whitney Houston, but to make fun of the National Enquirer, that they would probably print a story like that. Alright, so you can see it. Alright. If you want to move your chairs up, that's fine. I just want to make sure all the stories are in here. Alright, that's it. So, you may want to move up and take a look at these things here. I'll read each one of them, and you can. And what I want you to do is, we're going to, because in an editor's room you have a very quick amount of time, so I'm only going to give you 10 minutes once I read these stories. So kind of get an idea of what you think you're doing. And keep in mind, if you're the National Enquirer, what kind of an audience you have.
What kind of audience? Isn't that more pop culture?
Right. You know, National Enquirer gets, it's a gossip rag.
Right. That's what I was just
Right. It's I didn't put the New York Post on there, but the Post is sort of like that too. It's a gossip rag. If someone's naked at the Statue of Liberty, they're going to put a picture on of that in the story. And even if it is a fat, ugly guy, they're going to do that. Anyway, like hair all over his back. They'd probably be more likely to put that on there than if it's an attractive person. Anyway, so let me read these. I'm sorry they're so small, but I wanted to give them all on here. So the first story is about Whitney Houston faking her death and living in Iceland. Which probably, they would find her pretty quickly in Iceland. I would assume there's not many African Americans in Iceland. Anyway, especially it looked like Whitney Houston. So. Anyway, number 2, story about Paris Hilton's $1 billion fragrance empire, which is actually true. believe it or not. Anyway, number 3, story about $60 billion a year in fraud in the Medicare and Medicaid system. Number 4, story about Muhammad Atta being a CIA agent. No verifiable source can be found to back up the story, though. Keep that in mind. Number 5, story about the Stop Online Piracy Act and media market concentration harming free speech. So that's a story about the media itself. Number 6, story about Rick Santorum leading Mitt Romney by 10% in a national poll, which is actually true. Believe it or not. Number 7, unconfirmed story that President Obama is an alcoholic. And believe it or not, I actually saw that on the front of one newspaper. You can probably guess which newspaper it was. Number 8, story about Charlie Sheen relapsing with Josh Hamilton in a Dallas bar. That one's not true, but I thought that would be interesting. And people who have no understanding of chronic relapse don't know what Josh Hamilton is going through. So anyway, number 9, story about a serial killer in Gilgo Beach, which is actually true. And the police have done absolutely nothing to arrest anyone. Does anybody know the status of this case? Have they arrested anybody? No. And you know what the serial killer's going to do? Oh, he's going to chill out for a while. Until everybody's forgotten about it. Maybe he doesn't like cold weather. Who wants to murder somebody when it's cold? Where are you going to bury the body? You know? I guess that's why I know
so much about it.
Because I studied social deviance. I know you're getting at. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't one. Actually, at one point I wanted to be a bit of a criminal profiler, so I learned a lot about them. And I teach deviance, and murder is always such a sensational story. So I've done things on Charles Manson and Jim Jones and the BTK killer and Ted Bundy, stuff like that. So I know who these people are. But they won't act. I'm not working for them until they pay me, but I'll find you a little serial killer. The problem is, you get serial killers mad at you, you just hope they don't escape from prison. And sometimes they arrest somebody who's the killer and he gets off because there's not enough evidence, and then he blames you for turning him in, so you're next. Anyway, number 10, story about the dangers of the national debt and the future of Social Security, education, and health care in this country. Number 11, story about Governor Cuomo cutting the NYC public school budget even further. Number 12, story about Governor Cuomo going to Elliot Spitzer's escort. Only one somewhat unreliable source with no other witnesses. The governor has refused to comment. And number 3, Stony Brook. I would have put Malloy on here, but you're not Division I. Stony Brook's basketball team goes to the NCAA tournament for the first time in its history, which actually almost happened a couple years ago. They went to the NIT and they played Illinois, and Illinois was supposed to host a game, but they thought they were going to be in the tournament, so they had Cirque du Soleil in their stadium, so they had to play in Stony Brook. And I can imagine what Illinois thought when they showed up at that little dinky arena. They were like, first of all, they were like, what's Stony Brook? And when they showed up at the arena going, is this the practice facility, right? Anyway, if you've ever seen Stony Brook's little, put it in your hand, crush it. Anyway, so again, so those are the stories. So everybody I'm going to give you about 10 minutes. Decide remember, a headline or a lead story, and then 4 other stories, and then we will discuss it. And you'll see that this isn't so easy to decide which stories to do. Alright, I'll be right back, and then I'll help you guys out. I gotta use
Oh, the third one.
It clearly said.
Yeah, I wrote that down.
You picked up one that should be like
And I guess they covered that.
Medicare Fraud.
So I guess like the Dildo Beach was out there first. No one cares about Stony Brook. Definitely the third one, right? That's the one. I was thinking that just because like that's complicated.
You should grab the extra credit? Yeah. Extra credit is you watch that loose change video.
I don't know
if it alters your view on what it is. I don't know if it's really extra credit.
Obama doesn't really matter. Charlie Sheen.
Alright, what you want to keep in mind is what your audience wants, and that you're under intense competition to get viewership. So keep those things in mind. And you obviously want to inform the public, especially if you're New York Times or PBS or CNN. Your reputation is a little more on the line than Channel 12 and some of the other people. So remember, we have 6 groups. So you guys are back in like another group. So you two, like there's 2 groups of 3 there. You guys are separated, right?
Yeah.
All right. All right. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Does our station have to talk about Long Island?
No, not just that. I mean, what you want to do is you certainly want to focus on things in Long Island, but you don't want to ignore big national stories, right? Like you got to think: should you leave the story out about the serial killer? Right? I mean, the New York Times maybe doesn't need to talk, or the National Enquirer, unless they found somebody having sex with a corpse, and then the National Enquirer would be interested in that. You guys are not hungry. You got about 5 minutes. Start making decisions. Start deciding what the main story of whatever. If you're a newspaper, it's the one story about the fold. 4 other stories.
I don't know what order I think.
Oops.
It's a pluralist and functional style.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know. Yes.
I think Medicare.
Yeah, but it doesn't show all the stories at once.
Do it on yourself. I'm going to try to record this one I need to do. Mr. Credit, that one-page double space, you're saying goes what?
Double space is fine. Sorry, I can't make it bigger. Alright, 2 minutes. And on Thursday as well, what we're going to do, we're going to address question number 3. We're going to talk about solutions that are discussed in the book for the media monopoly, both individual solutions individuals can take to increase their news literacy, but also actions that perhaps the government or other institutions might want to take to reduce this monopoly. And then we're going to talk about the Stop Online Piracy Act as well. So start making decisions.
News 12 is done.
All right, good. Who else is done?
We're done.
All right, is everybody done? Yeah. All right, good. Okay, let's start with group 1. You guys are the National Enquirer. Which stories did you choose?
Whitney. Yeah.
So that's your front story. What's your next one?
Paris Hilton's $1 billion fragrance empire.
Okay, what else?
Cuomo Lowe's descriptions escort.
Okay, and then third story?
Obama's not the water.
I guess that's fourth. And then fifth one, the last one.
Charlie Sheen election.
So basically 3 of your stories were unconfirmed based on sort of innuendo, almost TMZ-like. Okay, why did you guys make that decision?
Because National Enquirer is mainly pop culture-ish, and it's directed towards people who don't really want, or maybe the National Enquirer likes to cover up the real news and only...
Alright, so maybe they don't realize that they're doing this, that by calling themselves a newspaper and putting these stories out, first they're distracting people from real news stories like the national debt or something like that, or Medicare, Medicaid, or the potential war with Iran or something like that. But also that they are undermining the credibility of newspapers in the general public's eye because they play with garbage. And you think, well, if the National Enquirer does that, how far is the New York Times? And I know New York Times reporters, if they ever heard me say that, would jump up and lose their mind and pull their hair out that I even compared the New York Times to the National Enquirer. But they did have, I can't remember his name, there was a reporter at the New York Times that was making stories up. And they fired him and everything.
Wouldn't have the New Republic?
No, the New York Times had that too. No, you're right. That was Stephen Glass, who was, believe it or not, played by Anakin Skywalker. Hayden Christensen. They made a movie into it, and he did. Unlike that, the New York Times reporter didn't even bother to even try and pretend Stephen Glass added things to a lot of stories that weren't there. This guy that worked for the Times just made stuff up completely. He didn't even pretend. But anyway, Stephen Glass made up fake websites and fake phone numbers and fake phone messages to make it look like these things he was writing about really existed. So if that can happen there, what's going on at the National Enquirer? And I believe the National Enquirer was nominated for a Pulitzer on the story they did on John Edwards, which they were exactly right on. All right, let's go to group number 2.
We did Medicare.
What outlet were you?
CNN.
Okay.
Medicare is the first one.
Okay.
National debt is the second one.
All right.
Santorum leading by 10% is the third. The Stop Online Piracy Act is 4, and the New York City school budget is 5.
All right, so everything seemed to fit there pretty good, I think, except for maybe number 4. Why do you think the CNN might not want to talk about that issue? Or what? Let me put it another way. Why did you guys choose that story?
All the other ones really weren't relevant.
Okay, so it was almost just an element of... And CNN gets these problems where, let me put it that way. Let's take that story out. What other story would you have done without that story on there?
The only one really would be the Muhammad Otto one, but there's no sources. You know,
and you see the dilemma that CNN is in with 24 hours of live or whatever the hell it is, even if it's 10 hours, that they have to manufacture news sometimes. One of the seminal cases of this is the JetBlue incident, where I don't know if any of you guys remember this, but if this plane would have wrecked, the people could, because JetBlue has DirecTV, so the people were watching CNN while it was broadcasting. I'll explain it, and if we have time, I'll show it to you. JetBlue, an airliner, took off, and their everything is computerized. So the landing gear in front is supposed to go like this. And here's the wheels set straight, and when it's done, it sits like that, and then it comes up into the plane. It got stuck this way, so the wheels were not this way; they were this way. And you can't dump fuel out of this airplane because it was an Airbus. And so it had to fly around until there was not any real fuel on it to where it wouldn't explode. And while this was going on, first of all, they broke into like some kind of, they were doing a show, and they broke into it and said, we've got this incident, something might happen. And it's live. They sent helicopters flying around the airplane. And the people on the board of the plane, because the pilot didn't turn it off, were watching this coverage. And they had experts on there going, this is what we might think might happen to the plane. It might roll over and explode and fall. And these people on the plane were watching these people talk about their potential imminent death. And in the end, guess what happened? It landed, and the tire, like, you got to hand it to the pilot, because it could have been the tire got basically shredded down into nothing. And it landed on the metal part. It was sparks and everything flying. I mean, it was not an easy landing. The passengers said that the airline stewards were creeping them out, because they told them to like pull their heads down, and they were going like this, brace, 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 like that. It's like, that's what I'm talking about. Like a cult, turned into a cult meeting, and everybody was, and believe it or not, even though it looked rough on the outside, the passengers said it was one of the smoothest landings they'd ever had. And so nothing happened. So CNN spent like 3 hours, I'm not kidding you, 3 hours covering this, scaring the crap out of people. And again, I would say the same thing to the Weather Channel. Every time, even the smallest hurricane comes along, man, they play it up like it's the end of the world. Part of the reason why they do that is because they missed Hurricane, they misdiagnosed storms before, like Hurricane Andrew and Katrina. Said they weren't going to be that big of a deal, and then they strengthened in the Gulf. So anyway, yes, quick.
My uncle was on that plane.
What did he say when he was watching?
I never really talked about it with him, but I'll ask him if he
Yeah, ask him that he thought it was strange that the pilot didn't turn the DirecTV off, and they were sitting there talking about they had computer animation that showed an airplane flipping over and exploding, and like like you saw the computer animation there on loose change and stuff. All right, so I think that's an excellent point, and you see here where you're kind of stuck because you probably didn't want to do that story, right? But to fill in the air, how come you didn't do the thing on how about the Paris Hilton story? Just too goofy, too fluffy? Yeah. Okay. Because that's a real story, believe it or not. I mean, at the very minimum, you could do it as a criticism story. Why does Paris Hilton have a $2 billion fragrance industry or whatever? All right, number 3. New York Times.
Our front page story was the budget cuts for New York City schools.
Okay, because you're in New York, but you're also a national and global paper.
Yeah, so our second story was the national debt crisis.
Okay,
so
that's a good one.
And then after that, we did Mitt Romney, How We Were Behind, and then the $6 billion fraud in Medicare and Medicaid, and then the Piracy Act.
Okay. So did you feel like you were stuck with the piracy story?
No, not really. That was actually one that we chose.
Even though it potentially is sort of talking against your own industry?
It is? Oh.
To some extent. I mean, it's not... The New York Times could make the argument that the Online Piracy Act doesn't really touch them, other than the fact that their content is online.
I was going to say.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure who...
But the New York Times likes to present itself also as sort of a watchdog, and a liberal watchdog, to where it would maybe see concentration in media as a bad thing in general. And many times newspapers, if they get a reputation that, hey, they're too cozy to one industry or another, will run the story deliberately against it. Like the token opposition to sort of say, see, our hands are somewhat clean. We'll still attack these people. So.
We just thought it was kind of an important story, and and the New York Times isn't going to publish anything that's, you know, frivolous or
right.
something that you don't need.
And it's legislation, so it's important regardless of what happens. It doesn't mean they're going to make a position on it. It's not a commentary. So, all right, group 4.
We did the lead story was the national debt.
Okay. And you guys are PBS, so you should be doing more serious stories.
Right. So 2 was the Medicare, the $60 billion fraud.
Which those are related stories.
3 was the Mitt Romney and Santorum. 4 was the Stop Online Piracy, and 5 was the school budget.
So you guys seeing like why some of these news agencies do the same stories? And how their hands are sort of tied? Okay? So I'm surprised you guys didn't do something that none of the serious ones did, the story about Whitney Houston. Right? Or at least as you won't believe this. Right? Because sometimes PBS will do stories about stuff like that. Maybe I should have put another story on a story about Whitney Houston's drug addiction. You know, in context. You know, placing it in.
More reliable.
Yeah, something going. Hey, Whitney Houston died from this disease. Let's look at the statistics behind it. Why do people chronically relapse? You know, I'm surprised you guys didn't put the Charlie Sheen one on. I guess not PBS, but I would say CNN. I'm surprised you didn't put the Charlie Sheen one on there. Because that was essentially a confirmed story, at least in the guises of our group exercise. Anything? Any other comments you guys want to make?
Not really.
You didn't find it difficult deciding which stories to run?
Just to find which ones are the lead. But yeah, most of those stories kind of just aren't relevant. Like most of the New York ones weren't relevant, but the fact that it was about like public schools and it was more about the politics of it, that was important.
Well, New York is a national news. Anything that happens in Los Angeles or New York many times is national news. So, all right. Any other comments? All right. Group 5. You guys are Channel 12 Long Island, the station that loves to deal in murder and children drowning in buckets, and then talk about some pumpkin festival in Riverhead or something. Go ahead.
We're going to start off with the serial killer.
Okay. Local and, on some levels, maybe national importance.
And then we went to national debt after that.
Okay.
And then we went to Governor Cuomo.
Right. Which story about Cuomo?
Can we scroll down?
Yeah. The one about him going to Spitzer's hooker?
No, the New York City school.
Okay.
And then we went to Medicare.
Okay.
And we finished up with Stony Brook.
Yeah. All right, so that's a good one. So you say there's a bit of a smattering of local news, and yet mixed in there. Maybe I should have put one in there about like a house party where the house caught on fire and whatever. Like this. By the way, there was a movie called Project X before this one with Matthew Broderick in it. But anyway, this movie to me, and we're going to discuss what fiction does to people's behavior. People say, well, the media doesn't impact people's behavior. I would say if you've already planned to murder somebody or to rob a bank, the media can implant ideas in your head. And most young people want to throw a house party, so to make one of these movies like this is... But maybe I should have put something like that movie in here about like a story about a house party where it got on YouTube. Because Channel 12 would love something like that, like on Long Island or something. Or maybe the SAT, remember the cheating scandal? So, and you know what's interesting about that story? That story got on 60 Minutes. So anyway, did you guys find it difficult deciding which ones to do? So you didn't have any real debate about, you weren't interested in Charlie Sheen or any of those stories, or President Obama being an alcoholic? Okay. All right. Number 6. And you guys are, what was yours one again?
We're Google News.
Google News. Okay. So yours is more of the internet audience, a younger audience.
So the headline is the Santorum leading against Mitt Romney.
Well, why did you pick that story?
Because if you go to Google News, a lot of times the top story that you see is usually political through the campaign.
And is that story really about politics? Like, is it about issues?
No.
No, it's more like what we call like a horse race snapshot, sort of what it is. So go ahead.
And then we also picked the Stop Online Piracy because Google did protest that.
Right.
And then we also picked the Charlie Sheen relapsing story because they do have an entertainment section on Google News. And we also picked the $60 billion fraud story and also the national debt story because they do have economic and physics sections.
Now, have you guys gone on? You guys go on Google News on a regular basis, and or at least like Yahoo News or something? Do you feel that? And this may be a question for the whole class. Do entertainment stories tend to trend like on? If you get on Yahoo, and I can do it here just to show you. If you get on Yahoo News real quickly, and I love getting on Yahoo from Google. I love Googling Yahoo because it cracks me up. Because it's so goofy. Here's their homepage, and I'll have this thing trending now. See? Look what's trending now. Now, one of the things you guys put equal emphasis on hard stories, or in what we might call soft stories, entertainment. Look at this. PlayStation Vita, right, which is PlayStation's new thing, and they'll probably only give you half a controller this time. Anyway, iPad 3, so these are 2 consumer electronic products from 2 major corporations, one from Sony, one from Apple. Here's a celebrity, Stephen Colbert. I'm not sure why he's up there. With Stephen Colbert, you never know if it's good or bad. I mean, he might be hosting a charity dinner, or he might have like beat his dog, or you never know with celebrities. Like I remember one story, Paula Abdul tripped over her dog and hurt her leg or something, and that was a story. So, the story was she was on pills and drunk, frankly, on some levels. So, here's another celebrity, Scarlett Johansson, dating a nobody. That's what it says. Magic Johnson, again, and you don't know what this is about. Maybe he's talking about Jeremy Lin, maybe he's talking about HIV, right? Cancer treatment, again, you many times have these health stories. Don't you think that news agencies look at this to think about what stories, particularly Google News and other stuff. Jessica Biel, no celebrity. Lindsay Lohan, what? Disney pepper spray. So I guess, all right, we'll check this out. This is how this works, though. This is how stories get spread around. People see and go, hey, what is that? That seems weird. Alleged drunk man pepper sprayed by Disney at California Adventure. So don't get drunk at Disney. Or at least don't get unruly. Why can't you be a cool drunk? I don't understand why people have... And look, I clicked on it and it came back. Now it's number 4. Now here's... I don't even know who that is. But here's Bobby Brown. Here's Peyton Manning. And now Jessica Biel is number 1. I have to see what's going on. Since Lindsay Lohan is a resident of Long Island. Believe it or not, I at one point went to the same mechanic as her father. No, now she's going to host Saturday Night Live. Oh, God. And that was in the Washington Post. Is that what that said? That's the Washington Post doing a story like that. But again, why do you think news agencies incorporate entertainment? This will be the last point. Well, why do you think they do this? Because the Times does this.
So that they can get attention, and then, I mean, I guess...
And look, they're tied in with some of these companies. If they promote these TV shows, they're going to get free advertisement potentially, or discounts. Like if I'm the New York Times and I want discounted advertising on CBS, maybe I do a story on the Big Bang Theory and how funny it is, right? Or something like that, or downplay the Charlie Sheen thing with 2.5 Men. All right, everybody. Have a good day. We'll come in. We'll review the test next time on Thursday. So bring in questions, particularly on question number 3. Thanks. I don't. Look, just quickly. I don't mind you using your hat as long as you're doing that stuff. But this is what I want. And both of you guys can do this for me. I want you to keep Google open and you to keep Wikipedia open, and that way, if we have any controversy in class, we can. And it also will, because it's a media class, it'll be interesting to see. Look how the internet works. So that's the only deal. But other than that, it should be okay. Okay, no problem. I just wanted to make sure you guys are using it for the class. So.
Or if I need to jot something down.
That's what saving money would enjoy.